Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Sounds Like Sustainability webinar, which is basically a conversation about sustainability and what sustainability is and what it maybe is not, and a lot of different perspectives that we share on sustainability. And this series of webinars is really proud to meanwhile now have a wide range of wonderful communicators looking at sustainability, as I said, from very, very different perspectives. And the beauty of this is that we, and here I'm speaking for the IECA, the International Environmental Communication Association, we really want to spark conversations around sustainability because it's something that is somehow all around, but then it's not, and it's tricky, and sometimes it's used and abused as a language token in corporate communication a lot. And then by the same time, we have wonderful examples of eco art or sustainable art or sustainability related art projects. And the series of conversations bringing in artists, bringing in architects, bringing in communication experts, and bringing in experts from different areas to talk about sustainability helps us to further refine our ethical duty in these times of crisis and change, to communicate for sustainability and about sustainability in new ways. So thank you so much, Natalia and Michal, for being here today. Before we talk a bit about who you are, what you do, what expertise you bring in, and what your perspective is to talk about sustainability, I would love to ask you a question that I ask every person that is in this webinar or joins me for this conversation, which is, can you please kind of be quiet for a second, listen, and maybe identify a sound, any kind of noise slash sound that you hear that you would somehow relate to sustainability. Can be rather odd, can be whatever it is around you. And I will share mine in a second as well. So Natalia, would you love to start? Is there
Yeah, sure. I can go first, and I must admit that I don't even have to be quiet to hear this sound because right now I'm in the office, which is very near to the main square in Wrocław at Plac Solny. If any of you were in Wrocław, it's this square very close to the main one where they are selling flowers. And currently, the sound that I hear very, very, very well every day for several hours are the sounds from the Christmas market, mostly the carols being repeated all over. So I would say that it is a sound quite contradictory to sustainability, if I may say like this, because the market is full of lights, full of sounds, full of non-reusable plates and cups. So yeah, I would say that that's something that I may think as when we are going towards sustainable future, it's not supposed to look like this.
Thank you so much. I think we can all now hear the bells ringing and kind of those funny Christmas songs and the smell of the Christmas market in our nose. Thank you for bringing in this perspective. Micha, what do you think, or what do you hear?
Yeah, it would be very similar for me actually, because I'm not in Poland. I'm in Germany, in a wonderful small city of Heidelberg, where there is unfortunately, I mean, many people are using bicycles to move around and to get to places. However, there is still a lot of car traffic. And right now, what I can hear from my window, which is right in front of me, is the cars passing down the road in front of my house. Not only the cars are going through there, but also buses. So this increases a little bit the contrast of the sound of sustainability, because the buses are obviously louder because they are heavier, and when they pass the street, the house can be shaken a little bit. Whereas with the cars, which are, let's say, less sustainability friendly, but are less heavy, so the vibrations and the sound is not as as audible. So this creates an interesting contrast between sustainability and the actual audible sound that can be heard.
Thank you so much. And this is something that is very, very interesting to kind of anticipate sound and the sound of the cars and the buses also, in terms of the vibrations and in terms of kind of being really involved what happens in this outside world here. So our relationship being in a specific room is then related to the outside, the surroundings of where we are at the moment. And I can only kind of link my own sound of the wind and the storm that is apparently very loud to hear. And it is interesting because it always reminds me of the wind and the weather that I experienced in Australia not long ago, which is always a bit more extreme. And now being in Europe, I tend to constantly compare how nature presents itself to me. And this is the same kind of interesting perception of being inside, being safe, but then anticipating all the sounds and everything that is around it. And it's great to kind of open up our perspectives here right away at the beginning, from Poland, Germany, now here Austria, kind of bringing in Australia a bit and zooming in the United States. Steve.
Hey, friends.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I'm going to be in and out of this a little bit, so I just wanted to share just a perspective on this initial question, which is really interesting. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. It's a typical, mid-sized city that grew and spread without a lot of thought given to sustainability. It's a river city, but now we're a highway city, like so many cities in the United States. I live in a condominium. Right, you see my bright side of my face here, right up my window is a pretty busy street. And the holiday season being as it is, it's pretty much wall-to-wall cars. Our city in the late 1990s decided to build 2 sports stadiums instead of mass transit. We had bond issues or opportunities for folks to vote to fund 2 massive projects in back-to-back years. And the voters of Hamilton County, Ohio, voted to pay for a football stadium and a baseball stadium. But then the next year, they turned down another bond issue that would have put light rail along the corridors of where the highways are and so on. Now Ohio is contemplating another light rail venture that would connect some of the major cities of the state: Cincinnati in the southwest corner of the state, Columbus, which is the state capital, right in the middle, Cleveland, which is in the northern part of the state, and Toledo, which is in the northwest corner. We'll see if the political will is such that gets built, because it would really help the traffic volume on the interstates across the state. So I see transportation and housing choices that we make really being very impactful in terms of sustainability of cities. So I would love to be in one of these cities in Europe or elsewhere where someone's decided, the city's hall or city government's decided we're going to have a car-free zone. In the central city, or whatever. Several cities in Europe have done that. The chances of that happening in the United States, there might be little pieces within a corridor, but the chances of that being a wide zone in the United States, I think, are fairly small. But it's a great idea. So those are just some of my initial thoughts. Thanks for letting me share.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think you tackled a lot of issues that we will tap in today, because we have the great opportunity to have 2 wonderful experts here that bring in, my interpretation is you bring in a perspective on relationships between societal systems that is very unique. So you deal with international relations, you bring in a law perspective, a perspective on justice, on human rights. And this is amazingly valuable for us better understanding sustainability. So I'm very happy that you're here, and I would love to introduce you to very briefly kind of talk a bit about your expertise or your perspective on sustainability here in this room, and we will open up the discussion into intercultural differences as well. But let's stick with kind of what we made our topic, which is bringing in a law and justice perspective. So maybe Michal, you go first this time.
Yes, of course. So if I understand just a few words about myself and my background, what can I bring to this wonderful webinar today, correct? Okay, yes. I believe the most basic thing to say is that I'm currently a PhD student in international law. I focus my research on the topic of sustainable development and international investment law. And international investment law also should be mentioned that it is a very specific area of economic law. So I deal mostly with what do the states wish to do with their economic liberty. Where to put capital, where to put investment projects, and what choices are made in this direction. And I'm trying to find whether there is some compatibility between this economic liberty and the goals to pursue sustainable development. Because as we might imagine, sustainable projects are not always the most profit-generating ones, which is the sole economic value that has been driving investment decisions for incredibly long time. And the hope that I have is that this could finally shift at least a little bit in order for sustainability to have a little bit bigger piece of the decision-making process that states do. And indeed, in my research, I have been able to identify some policy areas, some space for compatibility. And as I have these spaces identified, I'm trying to integrate sustainable development into international investment law as much as possible in order to achieve this sustainable development goals that we have. And we can then develop on that a little bit more, but I'm focusing mostly on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals agreed by the United Nations.
Thank you so much. And I love that you kind of sneaked in a bit of information about your passion, and especially why you feel also there's a bit of agency to do that, to actually walk those new pathways and explore something that is fairly dominated by a very specific narrative. So thank you so much. Natalia, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me. When it comes to me, I would say that I have a little bit dual perspective when it comes to the connection between the sustainability and law and policy. And both of them are quite different than those that Michal just introduced, because I'm also a PhD student in the section of international communication in the Institute of International and Security Studies in Wrocław. And in my academic work, I focus mostly on criminal policies and criminal justice. So when it comes to the sustainability, I'm mostly interested in criminalization of environmental activists, in new types of crime that are occurring now in this moment of changes in the smear campaigns and hate speech that the environmental activists are targeted, but also the new challenges that appear to the law enforcement. But at the same time, outside of the university, I am an intellectual property consultant in the company named Basque. And we help startups and scale-ups also with their sustainable inventions and the things that they can achieve. And I must say that some of them are really amazing, and it is a pleasure to observe how people are engaged in making our future better.
So thank you so much. Also, I can see this clear link to like exploring how understand, like how an understanding of how a specific system in our society ticks helps to then support new organizations, in your case, startups on the one hand, but also social movements and activist groups to do things better and to improve and to learn more about the scope of their action. So bringing in these two perspectives here is very valuable. And I forgot to mention, and this is also a first, that we have, it's the first time that we have two guests, which is so two experts. And I will try to create some links here between the thinking and the two perspectives that you bring. My first question here would be maybe rather simple, maybe the most complicated question on earth. From your perspective, if you need to define sustainability, how do you define it in terms of like, what is sustainability? Is it a principle? Is it a norm? Is it a value? Is it just a term that fits nicely to corporate marketing strategies? Like, what is sustainability and how does it work in our society? Again, from your perspective. Maybe Michal, you want to start again?
Sure. This is like you said, extremely interesting, but also kind of difficult question for me. I would say that for me, sustainability has two sides between which I am switching constantly because of my research and because of my private life activities. Privately, outside of the university, I would like to think that sustainability is really a way to live one's life. It's constantly present. It is all the time in your head when you're making decisions. If you choose to go by car or by bike, if you choose to buy this product or this different product, if you choose to go rather on vacation or to donate money to a charity, in all of these decisions, we could find some degree of sustainability. And for me, when I think about sustainability, it's really about these daily decisions that we are making constantly. And if we are conscious about them and conscious about sustainability as the goal and the end that we want to achieve, it has to be present every day and it has to be in our minds all the time. But then there is the academic sphere and what I really bring into my thesis and into my research. And in that case, I'm leaving it strictly legal and trying to rely on international documents, which inform us about what do states, what does the international community believe sustainability and sustainable development to be. And as regards these documents, I'm most often working and relying on the definition set by the Brundtland Commission in 1987, meaning that sustainable development is meeting the needs of the present generation as well as the future generations. So really this intergenerational equity, but also intragenerational equity of sustaining one generation and the others. And then, of course, the declaration from Rio from 1992 and the Sustainable Development Goals from 2015 are documents that I have tried to synthesize certain aspects and try to find common ground between these very important but 20 years apart international law documents. And on these common points, I'm trying to build a lens through which I'm looking to on international economic law, investment law, and trying to find these points of compatibility. So sustainability for me has these two sides of the same coin. But one provides or accompanies me in my private life, and the other one is the one I'm working with on my computer every day.
Quick question related to that. What do you think is the definition of sustainability that is more common or that directs a lot of action, not just on an individual level, but also in kind of organizations of different kind, political institutions, and so forth, from your perspective?
Yeah, I believe that the most commonly accepted, or something that almost everyone could agree upon, would be that sustainability really means strive to achieve balance. And we could then debate what is this balance between, what aspects need to be balanced. And I guess that depends on the actor in particular thinking about sustainability. Like if I am an NGO arguing for environment reasons, then of course I'm trying to find balance between whichever economic goal there might be and environmental protection goals. But I might also be trying to find balance between, again, economic goals and social agenda, social areas, human rights protection, or protection of workers' rights. And all of these are forming the concept of sustainability that should be taken into account.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I will come back to that and the aspect of balancing the interest, the purpose, and the agendas. Natalia, sustainability, what is that?
Yeah, like you already said, it is quite difficult to define it, especially that we are having ecological perspective, economic perspective, social, legal, and the scholars from basically each field are creating their own definitions. So I personally would go for something outside of academia and use the word that was already introduced here today. So balance. Balance between the economic growth on one side and the environment, the natural resources on the other. Further, balance between the needs of the current generation and the needs of the future generation, right? We have the economic and the social development that we need to introduce in a way that would protect the natural environment and at the same social equity. So we have here environmental protection, we have economic growth, and we have social development. So improving health, improving quality of life and education, not only for our community, but for the communities in general, all the communities. And we somehow have to at least try to balance in one with the other, which is extremely difficult. I think even more difficult than looking for the definition itself. So yeah, I would focus exactly on that.
Thank you so much. And I'm curious because this is something I always wanted to ask you with your specific background and expertise. The balancing aspect has to do something with the agendas and like who follows what kind of meta narrative or purpose, but it also has to do something with having a voice and having the opportunity to have a voice, for which not always counts for all different societal systems, not always counts for all the organizations. So not everyone is present in the public sphere in the same way. And by the same time, there is, as I said, something I'm really curious about, what you think of kind of nature having a voice, or nature being being heard in the same way compared to corporates, to the corporate world, or compared to maybe now some protests or some social movements. And this leads us a bit to something that is a point of discussion, like what are the rights of nature to have a voice, to be considered, to be something where which is considered, if we talk about the balance here. So maybe we can talk a bit about that and your feelings and or your kind of perspective on that, because there is discussion around kind of a river getting like to the status of a person that has certain rights in specific cases. So maybe this could be an example for creating a balance and giving nature a voice. So do you have maybe other examples, or what is your thinking around that? Maybe Natalia, you want to start.
Yeah, I think that the theory of the rights of nature is actually a step in a good direction, because we finally somehow recognize that our system, I don't know, trees, oceans, animals also have rights. The same, maybe not the same, but somehow based on the concept of human rights, and we have it here. So in my perspective, it is really important also in relation to indigenous people who sometimes don't have other ways of fighting for their rights, for the environment that is super important for them, than actually using this concept and trying to show that this river or this mountain is extremely important and it deserves to be preserved. So I really like this idea, and I hope that we can observe the development of it in the future somehow more. Of course, I recognize that it is quite difficult, especially that we are living in the world that we are living. So now the most important things for majority is the growth and the money, and we do not put that much attention to the nature. But maybe that's exactly why this theory should be introduced broader. Maybe it will point people's attention to the fact that something like this exists, and that we should care more about the nature and go forward with better approach toward the preservation of the natural resources.
Michal, what is your thinking about a river now kind of being a legal person or having rights in terms of creating this balance?
Yeah, that's for me, that's something incredible, especially as a lawyer from Central European legal background. That's something we do not really see in our legal doctrine, but I know of cases, especially from Southern America, where they have the rights of nature, and I'm unfortunately unable to, from the top of my head, to recall the Spanish word for Mother Nature, but they have this specific legal term included in some of the countries' constitutions, and specifically recognize Mother Nature as a legal person able to carry rights of it on its own. And I think that this development is something that South America is really 2 steps ahead, at least compared to Europe, where we do not really have this kind of concept of the nature having rights on its own yet set in our legal systems. Perhaps we are heading there, and it will only depend on the number of voices in how loud they are in asking for this kind of development, because as the theory would tell you, law is here to reflect the changes in society and culture. So if enough people accept this as something that should be put into the code, I'm optimistic that it will happen. But something that I wanted to mention is that I'm very glad that we brought this topic of nature needing to have a voice on its own up right here, because, and I would, this links the conversation to one that we had a few minutes ago about the finding the balance between specifically economic goals, social issues, and environmental protection goals. And yes, the theory of sustainability would argue that there needs to be balance between these 3 constituting pillars. But then again, some authors, including myself, would raise the point that, but is there really a space for balance between these 3 aspects? Because after all, we can have economic goals and we can have social standards, but all of that needs to be built on the foundation, which is the environment. And the environment is not just one of the three pillars that one can crumble down and the two others will keep the society as we know it standing up. So really, is the environment just one part of the concept, or should it be the founding ground on which society and economic systems should be built? And this is really not a question really of balance, I believe, but rather of a shift of focus, and to think about nature as not something that we can take from and we can contribute to protecting, but as something that is in constant need of protection and respect, and we should be grateful for something that we take back from it, take away from it.
And this is like a super interesting point, because I think exactly here there are massive differences between different cultures and their perspective in terms of like this caring and the concepts of caring and the concepts of kinship and the concepts of this, like, what would be the balance here and what role does the environment play? So but before we do that, I out of curiosity, because you have this amazing kind of comparison into different law systems. What are the barriers? Because you said the law system in South America is kind of 2 steps ahead. But what are the barriers here, like thinking about Central Europe now, and maybe you have some insights into, I don't know, how it plays out in the United States. Might be very, very different, and then compared to other countries, because I know that in New Zealand, you have the same kind of phenomena compared to South America. So this is where the another river got the rights there to actually have a voice there. And but what are the main barriers in like the Central European legal systems, for example?
Yeah, that's extremely difficult question, and I believe that if you would ask 10 lawyers or legal scholars, you would receive 10 different answers for this question. So my personal belief is that plainly the societies and the cultures in Southern America, in New Zealand, are simply closer to nature, and they have these wildly famous and protected areas like the Amazon rainforest, or the Patagonia zones, and like important and worldly famous environmentally important areas. They have them at the reach of their hands, and they are used to living in harmony to a certain degree with nature, I would argue, much more than European societies. It's not that Europeans would be happy about burning down forests in order to create more coal and more energy for our projects. It's that for us, nature has more of this utility aspect to it, like something that we can take away from, something that needs to be protected. Yes, in the long term, yes, we are depending on it, but it's not, perhaps it does not have even like a spiritual value to it, something that indigenous communities in South America and in New Zealand and close and the oceanic area would be much more vocal about this spirit of the nature that surrounds them. I simply believe that we lack this here in Europe, and perhaps also in the US, but I'm less familiar with that context. Yeah, so this I believe would be the one possible answer to that question.
In terms of the barriers here. And I think there is definitely, that is a very important kind of core idea when we start to look at sustainability as a concept from different cultural backgrounds, because it leads us necessarily to the question of what is the notion here, like what is the guiding principle of action, and that guides people in a specific area. And you said, yes, there is definitely a closer relationship between humanity and nature in certain areas that we can't compare with how we deal with nature in Europe, for sure. I would be interested, because since you are here, also bringing in some different perspectives in terms of Europe itself. So I know you worked and lived in Italy, Michal, and I know that you have experiences from now Germany, the Czech Republic, Poland. I'm in Austria now, so kind of we're looking at this now, zooming into Central Europe. What would be your take on the different interpretations or the different roles sustainability as a guiding principle plays, for example, in Poland? And I would hand over to you, Natalia, now, and give us a few insights on that, and maybe then we open up and look at those more granular differences. And if it's true, what some researchers say, that sustainability is a predominantly Western principle, contains so much capitalistic thinking and so much kind of Western that it could not possibly work in other cultural differences, other cultural contexts. So
Yeah, in this case, I believe it is a little bit right that it's mostly Western concept, but I think that it's more about the perception, because I believe that in Western world we created this notion of sustainability, to pack it somehow prettily and to try to sell it to people. Also with some kind of tokens, right? We have the reusable cups and all other things that are advertised as, if you want to be sustainable, you have to do this and this and this, you have to do that, you have to buy this, you have to have that. And it is very much visible in Western countries, I believe, while in those societies about which you were talking before, I believe it would be described more not as a sustainability, but I would say love for nature. So in the end, the goal is the same, right? Like to build a better world, develop, and at the same time try to keep the balance with the nature. But we just named it differently, and we have a little bit different approach to that. A little bit, a lot different, depends whom would you ask. I guess we can argue on that. And when it comes to Poland, I must say that in the last years, we observe a great development in society, that people are getting more and more aware of the sustainability per se, about the environmental issues, about balancing somehow the growth with the nature and things of this type. We have more and more people talking about it. What's important, we have more and more politicians talking about it, because a few years ago it was not an issue at all. Like everybody was pretending that nothing bad is happening and we can live happily ever after using the resources of Earth, regardless of how badly we will do that. And of course, today we do have some denialists too, unfortunately. But like general public hears people, like people whom they for some reason trust, like politicians, like officials on the higher level, and hear them saying, listen, we have this problem, we have to do this and this, we have to stop doing that, we have to react now, because otherwise it will be too late. It is already too late, but we can at least try to reduce some effects and help us live in better world. I think that in Poland, the main issue that brought people's attention to the sustainability and to the climate change as well as it's related were the droughts that were here in the past years, because we had situations where in some cities there was no water at all in the past years during the summer for some days. So I think that was the event that really opened people's eyes and made them realize that the situation is actually grave and that we should do something about it, and started the general talk on the situation.
And this is like a very important aspect that kind of connects this webinar to previous ones where we were also talking about how important it is to have these first-hand experiences to create a connection. So if we want to talk about balance, if we want to talk about recreating human nature relationships, then we need to connect people sometimes back to nature. And there are kind of more positive ways to do that, but also there are those ways where you are forced to have this this first-hand experience of a drought, of floods, of bushfire, or just forest fires as they happened heaps last year in Europe. And then people suddenly have this kind of link again and realize, oh, whoa, somehow I'm related to this, what I call nature, and recreate these relationships. So this is kind of an issue that comes up in a lot of these conversations about sustainability. But before I open up this for questions from the others, maybe one last question, or like the opportunity for you, Michal, to bring in maybe some reflections on Czech Republic, maybe Italy, maybe comparisons or differences that you mentioned or that you recognized dealing with this topic.
Sure. I would have to agree that sustainability appears still like a Western concept, or at least, if not Western, to not polarize in this way, I would say a concept that comes from states that have already their development phase done, that are economically rich, are able to export capital, and feel like this economic position for them opens new opportunities and new points of view, and makes them afford to be able to it makes them able to be conscious about environmental impact of their actions. But this is, at least in my view, still to be considered a luxury, because there is still a majority of states in the world that are struggling with different types of problems than environmental ones. And those would be eliminating child labor, eliminating extensive drug use, eliminating extreme poverty and hunger, eliminating conflicts, civil wars. And these are problems of least developed states or more poor states in the world. And in this way, then sustainability and calls for more environmentally conscious actions really comes down to these countries and urges them to do something they are perhaps not yet ready to do. And these voices, this is not something that is new. This has been happening since the 1987 report that I've mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. Developing countries and least developed countries were very much aware and afraid of this concept of sustainability and sustainable development in particular, because they may see it as a standard that is imposed on them by already developed countries, and that would limit their growth, and saying, no, but you cannot have your version of the Industrial Revolution. Yes, we did that, we have it, we are now rich and developed countries, but you cannot do that because that would pollute the earth too much. So you cannot have that part. You either have to skip it or you need to stay where you are. And in order to skip it, economic rich countries should provide the capital, at least in my point of view. There needs to be cooperation on this level in order to have equity in the world, so that these developing countries could skip this phase, could afford to do that. And it should be paid by those who didn't skip it and who did pollute the world in this way. So that was just my thought on this Western conceptualization of sustainability. But compared to Natalia, I'm afraid that the Czech Republic and Italy, at least to the degree I am able to speak on their behalf, are really currently struggling with different problems. In Czech Republic, it would be the current budget deficit. In Italy, it's the migration problem that are taking away a lot of the public attention. So at least to the degree that I'm aware, these two countries that are close to me are, however, not currently like having the environmental agenda like on the top of their issue list. Although yes, I'm very optimistic that it has been on one of the top priorities for some time now, but it is still overshadowed by other aspects.
Thank you so much for these insights. And there are heaps of things I would love to ask you about justice and stuff, but I really want to open up this round here and give everyone else who's participating the chance to ask you questions since you're here, which is really great. Any questions? Maybe thoughts, maybe other perspectives you bring in, maybe other examples?
I would like to have, well, a kind of question, even though I know it will be very difficult to answer. It's just that it's interesting. Natalia mentioned that in South America, there's a law that is more progressive, or Misha say it like that. I remember, so I come from Indonesia and I live here in Germany. In Indonesia, we also have things like that where you could, I remember the latest case several years ago was that there is a company being, I mean, they have to pay a higher fine because they not only for a corruption case, but also causing environmental damage, like million of dollars. So, and the environmental organization praising it, but after years, they're not paying a cent of the fine, and they're okay. So this kind of, I mean, yes, the law is there, but this law enforcement is not really happening. I think that is what I feel different here in Germany, so to say, that you could even get fined, and you really get fined if you put the wrong garbage in the wrong can. So how we could do that? So that is not only a lip service for me, this existence of law, but also reinforce it to be real, so that people get punished when they do something. Or maybe not people, to be precise, huge companies who really taken away so much from other people, and also animals. I'm so sorry. Just putting my thoughts.
Oh, really important question.
No, and thank you for that. If I believe the question was directed towards myself, so I will continue answering. Yeah, thank you for raising that. I completely agree with you, and I'm aware of this issue in a number of cases in a number of countries, and with concerning a number of companies. Especially in my field of law, which would be the investment protection. So you have the big corporate investor coming into usually a poor country, receiving some sort of financial investment from abroad. And yes, when things go poorly and the investor is found to be liable for some type of environmental or social damage, and the state is fortunate enough for there to be a tribunal that is willing to set a fine upon this very powerful, especially economically speaking, international actors such as these huge companies. The question of enforcement, the question of actually getting the money that you are owed, is a big issue, and from legal perspective there is a variety of reasons for that to be the case, but the one that I would mention here is a simply question of jurisdiction, meaning that like you said, the example from Indonesia, I believe, when these foreign companies arrive there and cause damage and are found liable, they may not own sufficient assets in Indonesia in order to satisfy these, like you said, huge, extremely high talking millions and millions of dollars claims. And it may be easier in Germany or Western Europe generally, because these companies are actually from here. They are German companies, French companies, Dutch companies, US companies who own most of their assets and who started their business in these Western countries. Also, the legal systems that are to be enforced perhaps are more flexible and more easily to be enforced in these Western countries with long legal traditions, and digitalization and public records of these companies, and you can find the assets and you can find what could be liquidated in order to satisfy these claims. This is, I believe, still easily done in developed world rather than these countries that are in need of these systems and are in need of these upgrades to their to their legal systems. So the solution, if to end on a positive note, would be just to increase the cooperation simply between the representatives of states. There is no reason for developed countries not to share share the know-how of how to proceed in these types of cases with their colleagues from countries suffering from these environmental claims, and things could get better. Yeah.
That is great. And thanks, Melinda, for kind of articulating in the chat something that is kind of a red line here in everything Michal said so far, that the kind of as soon as the corporate world and the political world get mixed up too much, we are in trouble. And the reinforcement of those of law is key. So thank you so much for doing that. And Natalia, you raise your hand, and then Steve. We can't hear you, Natalia. Not at the moment.
You have to click it again before you are like.
Yeah, I think you
and
are.
then use it, and you have to click it again, I think.
It's unmuted. Maybe if you try to kind of log out, log in again. Don't worry, we maybe Steve, you want to ask your questions quickly, and then we and then maybe Natalia is back.
Are we good in terms of volume? Right. So yeah, fascinating conversation. I am listening to this conversation with a particular context that our organization, IECA, is developing some courses for folks to take on various topics. We've created an initial series called EC Foundations, Environmental Communication Foundations. And one of the courses in the series has been developed by my colleague, Franziska Vader, on sustainability communication. Great topic, interesting topic. And she sprinkles in throughout, from time to time, this sort of idea that the concept of sustainability needs to be reframed toward, and you heard these three terms just a minute ago: restoration, kinship, and care. Easier said than done, of course, but the initial conception of sustainable development from the mid-'80s into the '90s and kind of moving forward, that sort of this master frame of balance, economic, social, environmental. Can we find that sweet spot where we can create wins for everyone, win-win, whatever. But increasingly over time, that is proved to be illusory. And in fact, we could argue that the sort of the logic of resource extraction itself is anathema to the idea of balance in some ways. It's also balance in the eye of the beholder. So now we have these other voices saying justice. This is this issue of other countries. they're in various stages of economic development, and you hear these conversations at climate meetings, et cetera. Hey, developed countries, we want to develop too. And so you're imposing this so-called sustainable development of finding this balance where you're not providing the tools to help us get there. And in fact, your logic of extraction keeps churning to create wealth. And so it's sort of, I think this idea of balance as a master frame has really run its course. In fact, I think it's dangerous because it's easily co-opted. And I don't think it can be achieved, especially now we're up in terms of climate change. We're kind of up against the clock in terms of, the challenges for systemic change. So the idea of reframing this conversation from sustainable development to sustainability, easier said than done, especially since we're using the same terms there, is real. I think it's really important. You hear the idea of restoration, kinship, and care, and a lot of the discourse of indigenous persons, other marginalized groups that come to these meetings. And I think that, not all scholars are going to have the same research agenda, but we really need to critique ongoing rhetorics of sustainable development that ask us to create this balance, this homeostasis between economic, social, and environmental. That's always going to favor the folks that already have the resources and move toward a different frame, or find examples of when that alternative frame is being voiced and sort of bring that to the surface as at least part of a research agenda for at least some of us. But it just kind of struck me when you were describing some of either the legal regimes and the challenges there, or the challenges where other countries are now coming forward and saying, hey, we have this global economy, but you're imposing this idea of balance on us. That these are some really important questions that scholars and activists can kind of move forward as we continue to discuss these issues. So that's really a comment more than a question, but any responses that would be welcome.
I might jump in for a second, because what I think is crucial here is to listen very carefully first before we then just bring in new concepts or new frames with a rhetorical, from a rhetorical perspective, because there's more listening to be done. What are those interpretations of care? What are the interpretations of kinship? And where do we have the examples? And what can we learn from the examples? Because care, again, and kinship are very differently interpreted in different cultural contexts. And therefore, I think this is really necessary to go a level deeper and understand, like, regeneration or restoration is something that is maybe more consensual, but care and kinship are, I think, very tricky. And this is where I think then, like, bringing in justice, bringing in equity, bringing in, again, thinking of equality, and trying to understand how are these notions represented in caring, in concepts of kinship, of doing things together, collaboration, cooperation, and have to do more granular work here to understand what care actually means, and how this plays out in, then again, different contexts. So get rid of the sustainability as a frame and explore those notions would definitely be something that would be very intriguing, not just from a research perspective, instead from really kind of talking to people and learning from examples. But Natalia, I didn't want to cut you off, so maybe we give it another go. No, no, what a shame. I'm sorry.
Maybe I can try jumping in.
Yes, of course.
While Natalia tries to.
Maybe you
but
can
please, yeah, when Natalia is done with technical magic, please jump in, and
yes,
I don't want to cut
jump
from
in.
your time.
Exactly. So you go.
Yeah, but yeah, I completely agree, and I'm very worried about what Steve pointed out. And yeah, I believe what I would add to that comment is that, unfortunately, and very much consciously the concept of sustainability and sustainable development in particular was created to perhaps overshadow this underlying idea that, yes, it is still the same thing. Developed countries are still pursuing economic growth, which is the development part. It could be, the development could be interpreted, and in fact, on a daily basis is interpreted as more of the same, more economic growth. And the sustainability part is there for, I mean, in order to make someone's conscience feel better and say, okay, like, yes, we do economic growth, and from the surplus of money from the enormous surplus of money that we generate, we will try to be a little bit conscious and plant a few trees here and there. And then when we spread this image, we will be spreading it as, this is good for you because you are green, you are going forward, it's sustainable, other generations will also benefit from this, it is good for everyone, and you are still achieving this growth, so you are still getting richer. This idea behind the sustainable development is really extremely contradictory if one really thinks about it. Like, can there be infinite development that is also sustainable? For me, these are 2 points that are on the other ends of a spectrum. So yeah, I believe that this concept is unfortunate, at least if the real purpose that we really want is like the green future of the day after tomorrow, where we use hydrogen cars, we plant trees, and we are living in self-sustained cities. Yes, in that case, sustainable development is perhaps not the best overall concept to go forward and to pursue. However, we should still keep in mind that this concept is unanimously embraced by 193 countries in the United Nations, and currently the most current and recent document, the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030 from 2015, is to be valid and the top one priority of the international community until 2030. So at least until this time expires, I do not really see a space for change or of shift of the focus. The policy goal is still like sustainable development as embraced by the United Nations, which, like I just explained and Steve did before me, is this very tricky concept that it still does not, it has potential, but it still does not deliver what is, I believe, really necessary to be done. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think like this is actually, this feels like, oh gosh, we just started a wonderful conversation and it opens up so many more questions, but we try to keep this webinar within an hour. So I would try to sum up and express my gratitude for kind of bearing with some tech stuff here and there at the beginning and along the way. And I'm very, very grateful for you being here. And there apparently, I don't know if you share this feeling, there's much more to talk about. And it seems to be crucial here to bring in interdisciplinary kind of collaborations to better understand the concepts, because we ended up talking about those concepts, and therefore this is very important. So we have a few more comments in the chat, and I want to articulate and just give Natalia a voice in saying, in what Mira mentioned, she also have to differentiate two items. We have criminal provisions for individuals, which are relatively easily executed, and on the other hand, corporate criminal liability, which is usually guided by different acts and more difficult to enforce. The holes and the gaps in legal systems, which can lead to evading liability. Question is also if it's politically motivated or just under construction, it's introduced much later than individually criminal liability. So I think this is something else, like we can see those connections between the logics of different systems, and then we see a gap between what is happening on this more systematic level and individual behavior or individual perceptions. And this is another kind of nice tension that again requires interdisciplinary perspectives on that. So we will definitely keep connected. We will keep this conversation going. Thanks everyone else for being here and kind of sharing your ideas, thoughts, and thanks Natalia and Michal. It was a pleasure. It was amazing to see you again, and I would love to keep this conversation going. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.